Hi guys, I'm Alban from Sky Guild, and in today's video we want to talk about my personal blue-white Lion aggro control list. I want a NoobCon 218 with and top 8'd at the NoobCon 219 as well. We will talk about the idea behind this deck, some strategy, card choices, my actual version 220, and moreover about differences to other blue-white deck lists, like for example Andreas Czermak's blue-white aggro list. He top 8'd at the NoobCon 218 as well. Before we get into details, please guys, if you have any questions considering deck strategies, card choices, or whatever you want to know, I would appreciate if you wrote down below into the comments section. I will try to answer you everything as good as I can. So let's get into the details. Here you see my actual 220 list. We will talk later about differences to my 218 NoobCon list, which are just a few, but let's start right from the beginning. I built this deck with the idea to not do anything specific very well, but to be able to adapt to every possible situation. You have to know maybe that I played the deck for a couple of years before building my Lions list, or let's say playing it at the tournament. And the problem I always had with the deck is that it in fact can adapt to every situation or almost any situation because it reacts, it answers every threat your opponent could possibly have. But there was one big problem. Whenever I had the deck or I brought the deck to a tournament, I faced the situation where I had a mirror match in many cases, because there are many players who want to win and therefore bring the deck, because the deck is the easy way to win some tournament rounds, of course, because you have all the potentially strong restricted cards, you can answer any situation. But the mirror match in fact is a problem, because you don't really have a way to be aggressive. You have to react to your opponent, and when both players play the deck, then in fact most games are decided by either Mind Twist, Library of Alexandria, or Ancestral Recall, maybe in some cases a Lotus as well. So in fact you're giving away your advantage of being possibly the better player, and highly rely on those specific cards to win your mirror match. And this is something I really disliked about the deck, in fact. So yeah, I tried to build a deck, as I said before, which is able to win against everything if you play it right, but does, on the other hand, nothing very well. So you see you have an aggressive package with the Lions, the Serendips, and the two Serras, but it's not really heavy aggressive, you know. You also have the counter package with 4 counters, 2 power sinks, and a mana drain, which is in fact pretty control-ish, but you don't play any tomes or any other stuff to create card advantage, you know. So basically this deck list is exactly in the middle, and the main strategy is to be able to transform into everything you want to have. Therefore, I also play, as you can see, the City in a Bottle's main deck, which might seem on first glance a little strange because you play 4 Serendipity Fritz as well. So basically this deck, or let's say the main strategy at tournaments, is that whenever my opponent is more aggressive than I am, I transform it to a heavy control deck, which means I put out the creatures, everything which does damage, for example the Serendipity Ifrits, the Psionic Blasts, everything which creates card disadvantage or additional damage to myself, I put out, and I turn it into a deck which is highly relying on control strategy, which means, for example, putting Maze of Ith inside, control magic, blue blast, whatever is necessary, okay? On the other hand, when I play against the deck, or decks which control the game even more than I do, I usually convert my strategy into a more aggressive one to be able to have a nice counter package as well, removing, for example, the swords to plowshares or the balance, or the balance not in every case. It depends highly on the deck. But to add more aggression. And therefore, for example, the Sarah Angel, the third Sarah Angel in the sideboard is really crucial. It's so important to just add, because in some cases against Red Blast, you remove the Serendip Ifrit, and you just need one more creature or one more threat to finish your opponent off. One question I got many times of different players of different nation was, Alban, I tried your deck a lot while testing against other players, and in fact, it doesn't work for me. It's not so good, you know. I lose in a lot of cases. I'm mana screwed in many cases, or it just doesn't feel so strong. How do you perform with it all the time, you know? And let's say the simple question to this is that the deck list allows you to do anything, but it punishes you very, very hard for slight mistakes. In fact, this is a advanced deck, I would say. Although it might not look like it, it's much harder to play than the deck. And however, it gives you many possible spots to outplay your opponent, which means it allows you, if you're a better player, it allows you in many spots to show your opponent. It allows you in many cases to outplay your opponent. Okay. So what's the difference here? The difference to the other version. Let's look first at the version. Okay, these were just, don't be confused, these were just winning cards, so they're not included in the deck. The main differences here you have is that in this version I played the Time Twister. Okay. The Time Twister, in fact, can be a very, very strong card, especially in tournaments and when you're on the play, because if you have a start like, let's say, land Mox Time Twister, or land Soul Ring Time Twister, or whatever, Lotus Time Twister, Mox, whatever, as soon as you have artifact power and you start the game and have an immediate Time Twister, you are very, very dominant in that specific game. However, the big problem about Time Twister is that it highly sucks when you're on the draw in many cases, and after boarding, especially against Red Blast, it's just much worse, or against Black Vise or whatever. So I realized after many tournament rounds that I would almost always board the Time Twister out after game 1, in some cases boarding it out in game 2 when I won the first round, for example, boarding it back in game 3 when I'm on the play again. So in fact, it was pretty strong indeed, but also very situational, which is not exactly what I wanted to have. I told you, this deck is all about outplaying your opponent, not being very good, not being very bad in every situation. And in fact, one of the main problems, so let's switch, I'm wrong here. In fact, one of the main problems was the mana base. I lost quite some games when my opponent early stripped me or played a sinkhole or 2 sinkholes in a row. In fact, the mana base was pretty greedy with just 18 lands and the Moxes and some off-color lands as well, which means 6 lands which just generate colorless sources. So the main problem was indeed the land base. That's why instead of the Time Twister in the main deck, I added the Scrubland in my new version, because the Scrubland gives you another possibility to have black mana to play that crucial first Mind Twist or Demonic Tutor, and on the other hand stabilizes your overall land count more. You could also possibly play a basic Plains to have more versatile options against Blood Moon, but I think, for example, that those 2 islands and those 2 planes, in addition to the Moxes, in general should be enough against Blood Moon decks or land destruction decks. So the Time Twister is the one thing I changed. The other thing is the sideboard. If you look at the 218 list, oh wait a second, this is I have to open it once more. In the 218 list, I played a Dust to Dust and just 2 Divine Offerings, plus a 3rd Blue Blast. Whereas in my new version, I put the Dust to Dust out, play 4 Divine Offerings now and just 1 Blue Blast. This is mainly due to the fact that I think nowadays in the meta game you have a lot more artifact-based strategy or artifact-heavy decks. For example, Leo Brooders deck, which is blue, black, and red with the animate dads. Or you have, also you can look at my 5-color artifact control list, which also in a slightly different version, Jasper Ising played at the NoobCon 218. And yeah, in fact, I personally, I don't know how it's about you, but I encountered many artifact heavy decks within the last tournaments, or let's say 220. This is why I think it's pretty crucial nowadays, until the meta game shifts, to play those 4 Divine Offerings. You don't see them now. I turn the webcam, or I just move here. So you see them, 4 Divine Offerings. The rest of the list should be the same. Okay. So, before we compare this list to Andreas Czermak's blue-white, let me tell you 1 or 2 more things about sideboard strategy. In general, the city in a bottle, I mean, most of the sideboard choices should be pretty obvious, which means I don't have to tell you when to put in the circle red or the blue blast or the mace or the control magic. But I was asked kind of often about the city in the bottles, when is the right spot to turn them in. It's pretty easy. The city in a bottle especially is against all those decks who play, for example, Curd Ape, Burnham Djinn, Druzam Djinn. You, against more aggressive decks, you usually never put them inside, sometimes against the deck. In some cases, it depends on the list of the deck player. In some cases, I put 1 city in a bottle in to have another removal against this crucial library of Alexandria, which is super annoying. But mostly the city in the bottles go in against decks which are more aggressive than you, where you put out your Serendips anyways and have a huge advantage. Also some mana greedy decks with 4 colors which play 4 city in a brass. This can be a crucial land removal where you remove 2 city in a brass and or a library of your opponent. So this is a transformational thing. Nobody expects it. Maybe nowadays the players do. But at least back then, 2018, no one expected those city in the bottles. And I would say if I had to choose 1 single card which really overwhelmed and surprised many opponents, hit them unexpectedly, then it was the city in a bottle 2018. Okay, I was asked before, it was like a member of Skyguild asked, so what is the difference? Maybe I could answer what is the difference between this list, and here you see Andreas Czermak's list, which is slightly different. He also plays Lions and Sarah Angel, 1 more Sarah Angel, just 3 copies of Swords to Plowshares instead of that, 1 Mace of Ith, which is pretty much the same. But as you see, he doesn't play any counter spells and no power sinks, just the mana drain, because it's really good, of course, and instead plays more aggressive cards like the Sushis. So the main difference, I would say, is the strategy I explained before. The deck you see here of Czermak does better what my deck, let's say the aggressive part is much better here. My deck can never play as aggressive as this list does, if you need it. But on the other hand, this deck here doesn't have really an option to turn into a hard control deck against super aggressive other decks, you know? So I would say this deck is a shift towards the aggro section, although it plays some controlish cards as well, like Mana Drain and the Balance and Swords to Plowshares, whereas mine is probably exactly in the middle of everything, which means it's exactly in the middle, and you are able to turn it into a control deck or turn it into an aggro deck. This deck is better at what it should do, but worse against specific decks, which means this deck could lead you to much better tournament results depending on what you play against. Probably it's a bit better against hard control decks or slow decks, whereas it's a bit worse against aggressive decks, very aggressive decks with burn and very crucial cards you have to counter. Okay, I think that's, let me see, okay, the Armageddon, that supports the strategy against control decks. The Armageddons are super good against the deck or other control decks, as I told you, and they give you another shift towards those control matchups. Let me quickly check the mana base. He plays a Scrubland as well. Mana base is pretty similar to the version I played in 220 today. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it so far. Guys, as I told you before, if you have any questions, write them down below in the comment section. I will try to answer everything. I hope you enjoyed the video and see you all soon. Bye bye.